All right. Hey, I am super excited today to have Sarah Hopkins on our show today, an HCA graduate and somebody who is working in the space industry. Glad to have you here, Sarah.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Let's start with the easiest question that we're going to work with. Will we colonize Mars in your generation?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I have a huge dream of seeing even just people on Mars in my lifetime. I think that's more realistic than colonizing Mars.
Okay.
Just seeing people there.
Okay.
But I really hope so.
So you think it's going to be like a temporary thing, like maybe we just have a lab, like almost like an International Space Center. Do you think there'll be actually people living there in the near future?
I don't think near future. I think it's more of a long-term goal.
Okay.
Mars is definitely something that NASA has its eyes set on through the Artemis program. So it might be more of kind of how we did in Apollo, where we send people, they stay there for a little bit, and then they can come back.
I as I was kind of researching for your show, man, listen, I went down some rabbit holes. Like, some of the footage that we have coming back from the rover that is still live on Mars, right? Is it?
Yes, there are several rovers on Mars that are still working out there right now.
And still returning footage, still taking rock samples. I saw that we had discovered something that would have been what they think would have been flowing water and like in a lake bed.
Yes, that's definitely a thing. That's the Perseverance rover is out there right now looking at all that.
Okay.
And so it's actually drilling samples into Mars right now and leaving little tubes that we're eventually going to go and pick up and bring back. So that's also a very realistic option that we're going to have Martian soil on the Earth here soon too.
No kidding. So so we've got the idea of the rover going in. How are we taking it out?
So it's something called the Moon to Mars program.
Okay.
And it's actually a joint session with NASA and ESA, which is the European Space Agency, and it's all part of trying to learn about Mars, where we're actually going to pick up those samples and we're going to launch them from the surface of Mars back to Earth. So, unmanned, yes, unmanned. And so all of that is kind of to help us figure out more about the physics of Mars and its atmosphere and how we can eventually take humans there too. Okay. So that's definitely something that's in the works now, preparing for the future.
Okay. I told my wife when we were newly married, I said, listen, if we ever colonize Mars, we're going. So, you have to be prepared for this. I think I've aged out at this point in time. I don't think I have any chance of being one of the ones who are going to Mars, but it's exciting, right?
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
I think the bigger picture is always something that you want to keep in mind when you're working at any career. And that's certainly the biggest picture you can ever have.
So let's kind of get into your story a little bit. So we started out with colonizing Mars. Hopefully we come back to that spot at some point during our conversation. But I would love to kind of get from you to explain to us a little bit about your career, who you're working for, what you're doing, and kind of the passions that brought you there, if that's possible. So jump in and tell us that.
Yes. So I work for a company called Amentum, and we are contracted by NASA to work on their Artemis program, specifically SLS rocket. So Artemis in Greek mythology is actually the sister of Apollo. Okay. So the whole idea is that Artemis is the successor program to the Apollo program that happened, back in the early 70s, late 60s. So with this SLS rocket, that stands for Space Launch System. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is we're going back to the moon to eventually get to Mars. So specifically in my job, I am a systems engineer in mission and fault management. So we work on getting all of the different aspects of the rocket pulled together to develop the flight software, because every part of this rocket is pretty much built by a different company. Right. So it's a group of companies coming together to build it. Boeing, Lockheed, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and so many more. And so what we have to do in mission and fault management is make sure that each part of the rocket can work and function together for a successful system, all while maintaining the number one priority, which is the safety of my crew.
Right.
And so a big part of that is looking at the fault management aspect. So that is looking at any contingencies or what can go wrong on this rocket, because we want to be prepared for it and we want to make sure that we mitigate that. So, for example, if you think back to Apollo 13, I would say that's an example of when systems engineering performed flawlessly because something catastrophic went wrong and we had to keep our crew safe, and we did, and we brought them back safely. But an example where something like that failed would be with the Challenger and the Columbia shuttle explosions. Those were catastrophic failures of engineering. And so that's what our group does. So we have to make sure that, I have enough battery power to be able to use an antenna to communicate to the ground. And I also have to be able to make sure that how long does my engine have to burn to make the orbit? So all sort of things like that is what we're working on in our group.
Is your company, are they a subcontractor for ULA?
We are a subcontractor for NASA.
So directly for NASA.
Yes,
okay.
I work alongside civil servants, which are actually people who work for NASA. So we do the same thing. It's just a matter of, who do you report to?
Okay.
Amentum has actually I should say we just merged with Amentum. I used to be called Jacobs, but as of last week, we're now Amentum. But they've held this contract with NASA for over 35 years.
Wow. Okay. So 8 years ago, you were graduating from this school, right? So
I
from
was.
HCA, just 8 years ago, which is crazy.
It doesn't feel like it's been 8 years.
Right. So what brought you into this field? You did your undergrad at University of Mississippi?
Mississippi State.
Mississippi State. Sorry about that. I know that's a sin. So, all right, Mississippi State. And you did that in engineering?
In aerospace engineering.
Aerospace,
yes.
with a focus on aeronautics.
Yes, but actually it was astronautics. In the beginning, I was focusing on aeronautics.
Right.
But
which is just the system of propulsion to get you there, right? It's the different vehicle, whether you're in space or whether you're remaining inside?
Essentially.
Okay.
So when I first picked aerospace engineering, I actually thought I wanted to do more on the shipbuilding side.
Okay.
So that's dealing with water. And if you think about it, they call it all aerospace engineering because it's the same. It's a solid object through a fluid body.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's ships in water or planes in air or rockets in space, it's all the same physics.
Okay.
But I chose aerospace engineering to go do shipbuilding. And then I did an internship in that general field, and I was bored out of my mind. I was dreading going to work every day. And it was that same semester that Elon Musk launched his first Falcon Heavy.
Right on.
Where his payload was his own red Tesla.
Which is still floating in space.
It is still floating out there with little Starman out there.
Yeah, for anybody listening, you can Google that and see his Tesla still floating in space. Yeah.
I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like, you can actually have fun in your job. Holy cow. So I went back to Mississippi State. I changed my concentration to astronautics and went and moved on in rockets. So one thing I say is that it's just as important to know what you do not want to do in life.
Absolutely. Great advice.
As it is for what you do.
So the young Sarah Hopkins, you knew you wanted to do engineering, but it's really that event that kind of turned your path into astronautics.
Yes, I knew I wanted to do engineering. If you had asked me when I was like 10 years old what I wanted to do, I would have said, I want to be a carpenter. But I had to kind of transform that into something that was more sustainable for something that I could actually do, and that ended up being engineering.
Okay, so even when you were younger, you loved just working with your hands. You liked kind of the practical application of learning.
Yeah, I loved doing stuff with my hands. I loved building things. I loved thinking about how things worked. Okay, and I'd probably say my dad instilled that with me. I was always tinkering with something about him.
That's awesome. Now your dad is a JAG lawyer, right?
He is a JAG lawyer.
Okay,
now his degree is also aerospace engineering.
Okay, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, very cool. So you would love to. Have you seen our new STEM our new STEM room and STEM programming here?
It's magnificent.
You would have loved that when you were here, right?
I
mean, it would have fired your jets. That would have been literally for you, right? Yeah. So that's awesome. All right, so walk me through, just because a big part of what we do is we're kind of constantly instructing our students on, hey, what's the next step look like? How can you get there? And so take me through, we've talked a little bit about your undergrad. Now you go on and you do your master's degree at Georgia Tech, a phenomenal school right in our area. Mm-hmm. Take us through kind of what those steps look like to get into this degree pattern, to this degree path.
So I think it's always good to remember where you are in the present, because you can plan for something all you want to that's going to happen 5 years down the road. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to happen. So sort of my philosophy on life is, all right, I'm going to plan for this, but let's see where the Lord actually takes me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because I planned to do aerospace engineering with ships, and I am probably as far away from ships as you can possibly be, because we're going to Mars, right? So I think that it's just helpful to remember, hey, let's just think about like the here and now, and let's kind of plan and take baby steps, because the Lord will walk along you through all of that. Right, and as long as you're glorifying him, then really there's no wrong mistake that you can make.
That's right. You know, I talk to our students all the time, so often, and you probably felt this way when you were younger as well. I want to know step number 16.
Always.
I want to know what's coming way down the road.
Yeah.
And ultimately, so often, right, we're supposed to be faithful in the next step. If we're faithful in the next step, God is going to then direct us to the next step, you know? And that's, I mean, your story is really a story of that, right?
Yes. Yeah. I actually didn't even get into Georgia Tech in my undergrad degree.
Okay.
For my first round of applications. I didn't even get in. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'm not supposed to go there. And then I reapplied again for grad school, and I got in. So it's also kind of that thing of, hey, sometimes it might take a couple tries.
That's right.
If you really want to do something.
That's right.
And, of course, walking along with the Lord through all of that, because I certainly know that there are some things that are just completely out of my control that I ended up being blessed with. And in some way, the working at NASA is one of those, because it's such a very niche position. It's such a very, I would say, a small project, a small part of aerospace engineering that is so specific. And I just happened to be there at a very good time when they needed extra people out of college, and ended up getting the job. So
you know, it's neat because you don't have to look when you're truly seeking out who God is. You don't have to look at rejection from a school as rejection. It's simply not God's will for our lives, right?
Right.
I was walking through a kind of a chapter with a friend of mine just recently who was applying for jobs, and he started the process of applying for this new job in such a like a man perspective on this, right? And as he started, hey, I didn't get this job that I thought, I didn't get this position, but he came to this point where he understood God's sovereignty, where God has a plan. Well, now he found the perfect job that aligned perfectly with his skills. It's so neat for us to be able to sit back and evidence God with this idea that in his sovereignty, he is going to direct our path. And so you've been taken step by step through this for a big purpose, right?
Absolutely. I think something to keep in mind is that it's not our timing. So you can, like I said, you can plan for something all you want. I'm going to do this right now. Well, does God want you to do that right now?
That's right.
Or is that actually the best timing for you? Because you don't know that.
That's right.
So it is definitely being faithful in the small steps. And honestly, that's really hard.
Yeah, it really is.
It's very hard.
It really is. All right, let's jump back into the space program here a little bit.
Okay.
For me, I know that the first time that I went to the Kennedy Space Center and I toured through, and there's that huge hangar with the rocket suspended from the ceiling. For anybody who has never been, you need to go there. But I remember the first time I went there, and you come in through those back doors, you know, the bus that's transiting you between spaces drops you off at this back door, and you walk through those doors, and there are these rocket engines above you that are like the size of a big van or a truck. And and then you start walking underneath this propulsion, machine, and you are walking and walking and walking. And then at the end of it, there's this little cone with 4 seats in it, you know? And I remember just thinking, there's going to be 4 humans on top of 11 stories of gasoline, and they're going to press go and ignite 11 stories of fuel that's going to propel them into space. I mean, you think these people are heroes. Like this is the most heroic, insane act for them to be able to do, right? So kind of walk us through, like, what makes you passionate about what you're doing?
So a couple months ago, the crew for Artemis 2 came and did a sort of a promotional event at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. And I think it's incredible that NASA does that because it puts into perspective the point of the mission. We can engineer an incredible machine, because let's get down to it. These vehicles are machines. They're just incredibly engineered. So we can make something that's this huge and incredible and an amazing thing. But the whole point of it is the people.
That's right.
Because these 4 human lives are our mission. Our number one priority is to keep them safe. And so when they came and visited at Marshall, we actually got to see them and we got to shake their hand. And it was incredible for them to tell us, hey, thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's what you do that allows us to go. And I think that they are the pinnacle of being a daredevil.
That's right.
Because I feel like not many so-called normal people would want to do that.
Yes.
Honestly, myself included. I don't exactly have the goal of being an astronaut in my life. That's just something I don't need to do. But hey, I will help you get there.
Right.
And I will make sure that it is safe.
Right.
So that's definitely something that's so fun to think about.
There's a real rebirth taking place right now in the space industry, right? So you have all of these competing companies that are jumping in. You started with the kind of the discussion of Elon Musk launching his convertible Tesla into space, which is just so fun and cool, right? I mean,
so fun.
Was his whole intent, right? It just it fired the imagination of a lot of people. We have a number of kind of our world billionaires who are stepping into this sphere. We have Elon Musk with SpaceX. When we look at Blue Origins with Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame, Virgin Galactica with Richard Branson. When we look at some of these ideas, like we see them entering this platform. Does that make things more difficult for NASA? Or how are they sharing this space? They're literally sharing space, like at Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah.
But how are they sharing this research space? I can't imagine any of them sharing their secrets on how they're developing things. So, walk me through that a little bit.
So I wouldn't necessarily consider them competitors of NASA. I would consider them as teammates of NASA, because we are actually, we've got contracts with SpaceX and we have contracts with Blue Origin to build the landers for the moon.
Okay.
So the SLS rocket that I work on, the very tall orange looking rocket, it is not actually the vehicle that will land on the moon. It can only get you to the moon. That's why it's called Space Launch System. It just gets you there. But the other half of the Artemis program is HLS, which is the Human Lander System. And both SpaceX and Blue Origin have contracts to build those.
Okay.
So I'm sure you've seen in the news Starship, which is the giant silo-looking rocket. That is what Elon Musk has proposed as to be the lander for Artemis 3.
Okay.
And then Blue Origins is still in development.
Okay.
So my team is constantly on calls with people at SpaceX to make sure that what they're designing is compatible with what we've designed on the NASA side. And I would also say that while they're not competing with NASA, they're competing with each other. So which drives innovation. And also, I mean, you can invent so many more things. You have to make sure that, hey, maybe they're doing this aspect and we're doing this aspect. Well, how can we make ours better? So if anything, it makes the space technology even more improved, because there's someone out there who's also doing it.
Now, the gorilla in the marketplace right now is SpaceX, right? They're launching more than anyone else.
Yes.
Okay. And so SpaceX, they're launching for a number of different platforms. So they have what seems brilliant and eerie at the same time, their Starlink's system, right? That they're launching these satellites. And so there are like 6,000 satellites right now as a part of the Starlink system. But their end goal, I guess they're adding about 30,000 more from what I understand.
Yes, it's gonna be a lot more than just 6,000.
Right. And so we have that business model in this. We have space tourism as well. Let me pause on that. Where do you stand as an engineer with this idea of space tourism? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing for the market?
I think it's a great thing.
Okay.
So the whole commercialization of low Earth orbit is actually allowing NASA to take a step back from low Earth orbit and focus on things further out, like Mars or deep space.
Okay.
So if anything, I think it's great. And also the commercialization of space and these space tourism things is bringing more awareness to the space program. It's saying, hey, going to space isn't just for some highly trained, specialized astronaut. Like, no, we're taking normal citizens, and that could be you someday. So I think it's anything but helpful. And NASA is actively kind of letting go of some things in low Earth orbit so that we can focus back on the moon and on Mars.
Average seat, any idea on what the average cost per seat on that is?
Last I saw, it was about $9 million.
Okay.
And I think that was for one of the Blue Origin's.
Yeah, I was looking at 11 to 14 million from what I was seeing. It's like crazy.
It's wild.
So definitely not me flagging there. I can tell you that.
Oh,
much.
yeah, I probably won't go either. If I had $9 million,
that's right.
I would go.
That's right. Yeah, so I like that. So they're looking at this as like NASA now gets to focus further out. Now, certainly SpaceX is focusing further out. I mean, everything that you look at with SpaceX and Elon Musk, we're going to Mars. Everything we're doing is about going to Mars. Now, there are very different philosophies in relationship to these companies, right? And so SpaceX has received a lot of criticism on kind of the build first, fix later model. And so they went through like, 4 big rocket explosions right when they started building, which almost bankrupted the company. How does that's a very competing philosophy, right? When you look at, like ULA, their philosophy is like you're going to engineer it first, right? Because like you talked about, your whole purpose is to bring your crew back safely. SpaceX is kind of a lone ranger in regard to that, where they're out there, they're building and taking off. Talk to me about that competing philosophy a little bit.
For sure. And I don't think either method is wrong. It's just a different method of doing it, kind of like there are 100 ways to skin a cat.
Right.
So on the SpaceX side, they are funded by private money. Pretty much all Elon Musk is how they're doing that. And actually Starlink is a way that they're also funding what they're doing too.
Yeah, they're printing money off of Starlink for sure.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And so there's that method where they have the means to see what it would look like if they just pushed the absolute limit of their machine. NASA is more limited in where their funding comes from because we are government funded. Right. And we also have the public to worry about. So if we are deemed, the public doesn't see us as, oh, you're not making a successful rocket. If they see us as you're just exploding things, like why isn't it working, then that's more liability for Congress to not give as much or not allocate as much money to the space program. And so that's why we as engineers have to make sure that every launch that we do is as successful as it possibly can be to make sure that we can continue receiving funding in the future, because we don't just have piles of money hanging around from our founder like Elon does.
Right. I look at, I go back to like John F. Kennedy's speech, 1962 at Rice University, where he is talking about this idea, like we will go to the moon, and for anybody who's ever watched any famous speeches, the clip that we really know about is where he says, we go because it's hard. Like we're going because it's hard, that we want to get there first. When I look at the commercialization of space, even getting to the science center in space, even getting there, we've been very reliant upon Russian rockets. We've been very reliant upon rockets coming from the UK. And really this commercialization now, SpaceX, right, just recently like launched and tied in with the Space Center, right?
Yes. SpaceX has what they call the Crew program. So it's on their Falcon 9 rocket with the Dragon capsule, and they just launched Crew 9, I think, last week. And so they're routinely making taking astronauts up and back to the ISS, which is still such a very new concept for us because we have relied on the Russians for that so long. But I think it's imperative for us to be able to do that on our own.
Absolutely. Like we have to have American technology that is rolling there. And frankly, I think we should be leading the way. At this point in time, would you say that we are as a nation with all of this coming forth?
I would say, especially with the Artemis program,
right?
I know that China is also considered working towards
leader,
that. Yeah. Definitely a leader. So those are probably the two space powers going. But the difference with Artemis now versus Apollo is that it's not really a space race anymore.
Right.
We are going for the furtherment of scientific experiments and for purposes of why not? Right. Like we can go to Mars, let's do it. So I think now we have more of a well-rounded mission because we're not just trying to beat the Russians anymore.
Right.
No, the world is a team now. Like the Artemis Accords have a ton of countries who have signed it to say that, hey, we're going to the moon in peace and we're going to do it as a team. So if you look at the crew for Artemis 2, that's going to launch next year, it's a crew of 4. One of them is actually a Canadian.
I'm Canadian. That's good. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sure, yeah. We used to just have the arm, right? The arm.
The Canada arm,
Yeah,
yes.
the Canada arm. So that's good. Okay, one of those Canadian. I love that. When we're looking at the technology, and I didn't prep you for this question, and I usually try to not ask a question if I don't already know the answer. So I don't know the answer to this, but I'm interested just to see, what have we learned? Like when you talk about the idea for the furtherment of mankind, when we look at kind of the learning process that we're taking from the technology, and kind of what we're learning in space is now translating back to the betterment of mankind. Can you give me some examples of that? Like, this space program is now impacting the way that we live in this particular way, or this technology has made things better. Got any examples for that?
I do.
All right.
Probably the most common example I can think of is Velcro. So that was made.
Didn't think you were going there. That's pretty fun.
Well, so back in the Apollo times, zero gravity. You if you use a pencil to write it down, well, if you let go of your pencil, it's just gonna float
Right.
off into who knows where. And so they invented Velcro, and they stuck it all over the inside of the capsules and all over every piece of equipment that you have to have. And so when you're done using it, you just stick it on a piece of Velcro. And I mean, I probably use Velcro every day now.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest example I can think of. And
Okay.
there are so many more like that, but that one's probably the most common.
I love that. So that's not super high tech, but it's
Yeah.
something that's very practical that's taking place. I mean, I know that in our STEM program here, we're doing a lot of study into aquaponics and like growing plants without the use of dirt, right? So
Okay.
I know that was a huge experiment that took place in
Still
space,
is.
that they were doing like massive research on this idea that as our human population increases, the ability to feed that population is becoming more and more difficult, just because so much land is being taken over by construction and human growth. And so learning how to plant, learning how to grow, learning how to provide for mankind the food sustenance available, it has to be done in new ways. And I know that was one of the huge inventions that took place really from the space program.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's the driving factor behind using hydroponics is we have to, if we're going to go to Mars, that journey is so much longer
Right.
than just a few days to get to the moon. If you have to take that much food for each of your astronauts on your rocket, well, I'll tell you right now, you're not launching, because that rocket's going to be way too heavy to
Right.
get out of atmosphere. So we're looking at dehydrated foods, and we're looking at growing our own food in space. And the space station has been pivotal in helping to design and research some of that.
I love that.
And they're growing stuff up there right now. They have all sorts of science experiments that do things like that. Another example is I know that they're doing some sort of like stem cell research in space. So I don't know much about it because I'm not on the medical side, but the general idea is that it might be easier to form stem cell parts in space because there's zero gravity. So somehow that's able to help with the formation of whatever they're trying to make.
So
And
interesting.
even with crystals, and I know there are some experiments that are using crystals for that, and then also anything else that can help with zero gravity. So
That's awesome.
that's kind of what we're bringing back to Earth, but then it's a double meaning because it's helping us get to Mars.
That's awesome. All right, let's talk about faith in the marketplace a little bit. How do you have the privilege, or how do you have the opportunity to really be a very out and out Christian, like a very committed believer in the marketplace? How does that impact the way that you live, the way that you also lead in your marketplace?
So NASA is full of very diverse people, which is incredibly cool because you get to make friends with people that you might have thought you would make friends with.
Right.
And so it's quite a special place to be in. And I would probably say I might be in not necessarily a minority with my faith. There are several other Christian people who are in my group, and it's refreshing to see that. But also it is a great place to share the gospel.
Right.
It's a great place to share, hey, like I work for NASA, but I also love Jesus, and
Right.
I have joined a church, and do you want to come to church with me? Because it's a great time for us to fellowship together. So there are definitely opportunities for that, and definitely opportunities to show what I believe and specifically why I believe it, because there is no greater joy than that.
When we look at the cosmos, we understand it to be created. You know, we understand that our Creator God designed the cosmos, and you know, when we look at that, there's no happenstance to that. There's purpose. We're a part of that purpose if we're willing to be a part of it, right? And so just your viewpoint on all of space would be so different than I would imagine an awful lot of people.
It is, yes, but I think it makes it more special to know that somebody actually created that.
Right.
I don't think that something that magnificent could just happen by chance.
That's right.
I think it takes more faith to believe that.
That's right.
Than it does to believe that someone made it.
Right.
So I had a friend in college too who said that she became an aerospace engineer because when she looked at the sky, all she saw was God. And I think there's magnificent truth to that.
Right. When I was growing up, one of my father's best friends, he was a mathematical statistics guy, and he worked as a subcontractor for NASA.
Okay.
And he actually confirmed the math of propulsion rates around planets. So if they were kind of putting a rocket into launch, he was a subcontractor that kind of handled the very high-end math from that. He had 4 PhDs, which is just absolutely ludicrous, right?
Wow.
I mean, he's just unbelievably smart guy. But he actually came to know the Lord during his second PhD, where he said that the handiwork of a creator was all around him and he couldn't deny it any longer.
Yes.
And it was literally his work in a PhD on space propulsion and the analytics and mathematics behind the rate of propulsion. It literally was that which brought him to search for a creator, brought him to God, brought him to Jesus.
What a story.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I think it's just telling that science and creation can work together.
Right. Right.
And it's incredible.
That's awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the idea. So about 50% of my kids here are young women. Are there barriers? Are there challenges to jumping into leadership positions? You're a woman in pretty high level positions, engineering program. Do you see any barriers? And how about some advice for our young ladies who want to maybe head into the same field?
I personally don't really see any barriers.
Awesome.
And if I had to come up with one, I would just say that you're going to be friends with a lot of men and a lot of guys, and that's okay. There are women out there who have the same interests as you. And even in my job, I was actually surprised by how many women are in the space industry, because in my internships that weren't space related, I was pretty much the only girl.
Really? Okay.
I was, yeah, and the youngest by far, but probably 30 years. They probably had 30 years on me. But at NASA and in the space industry, there are a ton of women who want to be interested in it. Now, we're still in the minority.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I would say if you want it, go for it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And kind of moving forward, and if I want to move up in the ladder, my branch chief is actually a woman, and she's incredible. Like, all of us look up to her, and she actually has the best sense of fashion and style. So I can only dream to be able to dress like her someday.
That's awesome.
So having her around, kind of as the superior to my superior, is really cool to see that it's not just a man's field.
That's awesome.
We can do it too. And I'll say this too: the crew for Artemis 2 that's supposed to launch next year, one of them is a woman.
Nice.
And no woman has ever been to that far out to the moon, because the Apollo program the capsules were designed only for men. And so now another part of NASA going back is that, no, we're going to include women this time.
I love that. That is great. Now, your husband is also an engineer. Is that correct?
He is.
Okay.
He is an engineer.
How is he working in a similar program to you? Tell me a little bit about that.
So he works for Lockheed Martin on the aerospace side. So he works with C-130s in the sustainment engineering.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about you now. Tell me a little bit about how long have you been married? Kind of how does that shape out? Both of you being in the same engineering field, is that positive? And then tell me a little bit about your church involvement as well.
So I met my sweet husband. His name is John. I met him actually at Mississippi State.
Okay.
So he was a mechanical engineering student. I was an aerospace engineering student. And we were pretty good friends ever since we met. And let's see, we dated for about 3 years. And we got married in July of 2021. And it's been nothing but great. And we live in Huntsville, Alabama now.
Right.
But I call Decula home. I grew up here. So it's been great. And then I guess kind of some hobbies we do is we like to go to the gym, and then I love to play Minecraft.
Okay.
That's kind of a fun fact. So people used to ask me, "Oh, what was your quarantine hobby?" Minecraft. It was Minecraft. We have friends, like our friends, when we started dating each other, our friend groups almost merged, which is really fun.
That's really neat.
Kind of some advice if you're dating someone is your guy friends will eventually become your husband's friends, which was really fun to see, especially being a girl in engineering. Most of my friends were guys, so it was like really fun to see that transition. And then into our church now, we joined our church back in March, so we've been in Huntsville almost 2 years now, which is crazy to say that it's been almost 2 years.
And Huntsville's a real hot spot for all people who are in your field.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Engineering, space. There's a ton of young people there and plenty of churches to get involved at too. And we found one that had a young married group. And so we got in real good with them and joined back in March, and we love it. We love it. We've made such great friends and have been able to find a solid faith family that we can relate to.
That's awesome. So I love just hearing this story of kind of an HCA kid, Hebron Christian Academy kid who's done great. I mean, just 8 years ago, walking the stage here and getting your tassel turned, and now to see how God is directing. What's going to be next for you? Are you going on for a PhD? Are you dreaming of bigger things in relation to your field and your career? Tell me a little bit about that.
I have no desire for a PhD.
Okay.
That is too specific, too much research. And honestly, you can stop going to school.
Right.
Once I kind of told myself that, I was like, oh, wait, I can stop. I can actually go do something else. This is great. So I don't plan to get a PhD. But it was almost like once I got the job at NASA, it was like such a relief. Like, oh, I got my dream job. This is amazing. And I haven't really thought about what's next yet because I love where I'm at right now so much.
That is really, that's the best answer. I love that.
Yeah, I've gotten that question a lot over the past couple of weeks, and it kind of makes me think, well, should I be thinking about what's next? I don't know if I should be thinking about what's next yet. I kind of want to enjoy where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Well, we come back to the philosophy we were talking about before. Be faithful where you're at.
Yeah.
God will take care of the next step, and you'll know when that is, and you'll know what it's supposed to be. Like that's the beautiful part of walking in alignment with Him, right? Is that it's that idea that He's going to orchestrate our steps. It's kind of a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
So,
like we just bought a house, and so we're focusing on that and everything else that comes with it. So
good.
That's what we're doing.
All right. So we're going to come back here to HCA. Tell me the story of Liam Ave.
Okay. So this is a really sweet story. I'm not the oldest of three. I'm actually the oldest of four. So I'm the oldest, and then you have my younger sister, Emily, also an HCA grad, and then you have my youngest sister, Ava, who's a senior here right now. Right,
senior, yeah.
So between Emily and Ava, there was actually one more. His name was Liam, and he passed away when he was about 7 months old. So my grandparents, who have lived in Tequila for a very long time, they were actually part of the development team who developed the shopping center across the street from Hebron. And when it came time to name the roads, they didn't actually suggest this. It was the group of people who were building it. It was right around the time that Liam had passed. They approached my grandparents and they said, hey, we want to name these roads after your grandson. And so, of course, my grandparents felt so honored, and how can you say no to that? It was the best way they could do to honor his name. And so they named them Liam Lane and Liam Avenue. And so it's very, very special to come back home and kind of see those roads still there, about how, hey, Liam might not be here anymore, but the five of us still are, and we have these roads, and like he probably would have been at HCA if he hadn't passed.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. For those of you guys who don't know the campus, that's really right at the center of our campus, Liam Ave and Liam Lane. And so I love that story, and it's just it shows just the idea that God's hand is in absolutely everything.
Yes.
When we understand what it is to have eternity, when we understand what it is to know Christ, it's such a confirmation that we can just have confidence in everything that's taking place around us.
Absolutely.
So, Sarah, listen, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I love your passion. I love seeing kind of how God has been directing your path and how He's going to direct your path in the future. I love seeing, women in high-end leadership and just a matter-of-fact faith in the marketplace as well. It's been such a joy to have you on the show.
I've loved being here. Thanks for having me.
Sarah, thank you so much. And hey, listen, we wish you all the best for the future. I'd love to keep talking to you too, as we're thinking about getting to Mars. Let's kind of, we'll have to have you back on the show in another little while after this next launch. That'd be pretty cool.
I'm down.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it.